Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this first webinar of the webinar series that the World Bank has put together. The World Bank's Climate Technology Program, housed in the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Unit within the Trade and Competitiveness Global Practice, really empowers developing countries to proactively and profitably adapt, develop, and deploy climate-smart technologies and businesses that meet the local needs, as well as they become the engine of growth and competitiveness and employment. The Climate Technology Program has established a series of climate innovation centers, which are institutions to support early-stage climate technology companies with a holistic set of services, including proof of concept grants, business advisory services, and training, access to market intelligence, as well as facilities to test their products and services. We have these CICs in 7 countries: Kenya, South Africa, Ethiopia, Ghana, Vietnam, Morocco, and the Caribbean, and there are many more currently under development in countries such as Nigeria, Mauritania, Tanzania, Egypt, Bangladesh, and I think many more that I probably am missing a few here. We are really excited to have this webinar started today, and the webinar began with the request from our climate innovation centers that wanted to better understand what are the ways that they can improve so that their clients are served better, and therefore they can be scaled up and create jobs and bring climate mitigation and adaptation to the communities that they serve. And these climate innovation centers that we've been interacting with is a part of a family and in the network that we are supporting, along with other institutions that support green startups and growing businesses in developing countries. And this close-knit family is called Climate Business Innovation Network, which the World Bank group has launched at the COP UN Climate Change Conference about a little less than a year ago, and I think we are really excited to have the network to support these institutions so that they become more effective operationally and begin to share the best practices and as well as challenges that they've experienced with each other, so that overall the network can be strengthened, and these individual institutions that support green startups and growing businesses can be strengthened in serving the communities that they are in. The webinar series is a platform where members can share and learn about the solutions to common challenges faced by the green incubators and accelerators, and each online session will draw from field experiences of business enablers in developing countries that we work with, and topics will be ranging from climate technology specific ones as well as general business incubation. For the first webinar, we're very fortunate to have the IC Square Institute at the University of Texas, based in Austin, and Mr. Richard Amato, who is a global energy lead at the IC Square Institute, is a very close, almost a family member to our climate technology program. He's been working with us more than a year now in pretty much all countries that we operate as a specialist and an expert to help these managers of incubators and accelerators on how to serve their clients better. And he really brings a rich background and expertise in clean energy and business development. based on his work at IC Square. And prior to joining IC Square, he founded and served as a president and CEO of NT Renewable Energy at the University of Texas, Austin in 2001. And it was the first incubator of its kind. And Richard established a successful program for clean energy ventures to accelerate their time to market. And he's also been working with National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the United States. And there he created the Clean Energy Alliance, a group of leading U.S. businesses, business incubators dedicated to providing business and financial services tailored to the needs of the clean energy community. I think he, based on his experience and work with us, he really brings a special intimacy and stories of understanding the climate technology program and in our incubators, the climate innovation centers, and I'm really looking forward to being able to share his expertise and wonderful stories with a wider group of audiences today through this webinar. His colleague Shay Fabode is a project associate at the IC Square Institute. He's been working with Richard about now a little less than a year on our project supporting the climate innovation centers. He's a cleantech entrepreneur and an innovation expert who works on and writes and speaks about the future of technology, innovation, and business. He's been working and living and studying in 3 continents, and brings a very unique lens through which he identifies the global trends, opportunities, and risks in the power industry. He's also a partner at Asha Labs, a technology and innovation consulting firm that serves startups and global enterprises, and an operating partner at Invested World, a seed stage venture fund focused on emerging markets. And today we're also lucky to have Raj, who will be moderating the discussion. So please send in your questions. Richard, who's sitting in make sure that your inquiries and your curiosity will be addressed as he makes his presentation. So with that, I will hand the mic to Richard. Hi, Richard.
Richard, we can't hear you.
There you go. How are you? How's everybody doing?
Great.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody, depending on where you are. It's great to be participating in this initial webinar. So I'm looking forward, both Shay and I, to working with you guys, and we'll be going through giving a little background on some of our work with some of the CICs. And as Jen mentioned, the topic today is going to kind of focus on some new efforts that CICs or incubators may be able to launch to help support the companies. So without further ado, let me just jump into the presentation.
Just so that everybody knows, sorry to cut you off, that Shay is connected via telephone, so that's why you cannot see him. So don't be taken. Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
He's not a ghost. He's actually So, first off, incubation. The definition of incubation is the act or process of maintaining something that conditions favorable for development, or under conditions favorable for development. And much of what the CICs are doing, it is basic incubation of early stage climate related technologies. Most of what we've seen in the CICs we've worked with, and the 4 that we work with directly are Vietnam, Ghana, South Africa, and Kenya. We've worked with the other 3 in the Caribbean, Morocco and Ethiopia through the annual network meetings and such. But oftentimes we see very, very early stage companies. So whether it's an incubator for babies or for chickens or for companies, the process of incubation oftentimes is to maintain a controlled environment to help those fledgling enterprises grow. The incubation process can consist of a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different takes on the process, but kind of a general flow is, you have an admissions process coming in, and then, the key is selecting the right crop of companies and having a good vetting process for bringing companies in. Once they're in, oftentimes, then there's several different methods with which incubation can happen, from pre-incubation through incubation to acceleration. Not to get caught up in the nomenclature, but pre-incubation typically is working in a shorter time frame with very early stage companies, usually in cohorts or groups. Incubation is a longer time period, which is often more one-on-one, and acceleration can be either early or later stage, but oftentimes so it's a little confusing in that acceleration can actually mean a continuation of incubation and helping accelerate those companies, or in the case of earlier stage or group cohort, it can actually mean just accelerating groups of later stage companies with a similar program. The point is that through most of those, not to get too caught up in the definitions between the three, but typically incubation usually is about capacity building. It's about training, it's about workshops, it's about providing strategic support, testing out business models, maybe bringing in mentors to advise and or other consultants. And it's also about the overall ecosystem, helping develop an ecosystem within which the companies then have a chance of success. Those companies that are successful then will graduate out. Others not so successful will be exited unceremoniously. The emphasis, as I mentioned, though, is really primarily on incubation. That's where traditionally the focus has been, and that's where we're starting to see some shifts, though, because typically once the companies graduate, oftentimes the incubators have very little further contact or relationships with the companies. But you're starting to see more activity post-incubation and post-graduation. One reason for this, specifically in the climate or cleantech space, is that, as we all know, there are specific startup challenges that cleantech faces versus more traditional IT or other technology-related ventures. Cleantech, and this isn't always the case, but cleantech usually has higher capital requirements, longer times to market. Just overall, the risk is larger, and it happens a lot earlier. And it's not just market risk. Oftentimes, it's technical risk as well. And let's not even mention the policy and regulatory risk that oftentimes can drive some of these markets. And there's a whole other assortment of risk as well. But what this leads to is, we've all seen the feared valley of death or the chasm of death. In traditional companies, when they launch, they build up, and then as they try to get to scale, it can be very hard to find the capital to grow organically or actually bring in capital to scale. On the clean tech side, we see it even earlier, though, of where they can get to they can get to prototypes, and then transitioning from those prototypes to commercial development. It can be very, very hard to raise the necessary funding. There's oftentimes grant funding, loans, and others early stage. In fact, most of the CICs have POC grants, proof of concept grants, which helps out in the early stages. But then transitioning to the commercial viability can be very, very challenging. What that has seen has been a more evolving approach to incubation, where in addition to just training and capacity building, you're starting to see more and more incubators and accelerators support, provide additional assistance through business development, which can mean a couple different things. It can mean for later stage companies that might be commercially viable already and selling into the market on a small scale. How do they introduce them to partners to expand that? It could also mean for companies that aren't commercially viable yet, but need pilots or need other strategic support or introduction to strategic partners to help develop their product into a point to where it can be commercially viable. And you're seeing that not just while they're in incubation, but you're also seeing that beyond, excuse me, beyond incubation as they start to move through graduation and continue to be a part of the overall incubator network as their alumni. Now, the question is, what's driving that evolution? And one of the key things, obviously, is it's supporting the revenue growth and returns on capital. And the reason for that is that there's new incubators that are popping up, Techstars, Y Combinator, 500 Stars, like that are incubators/accelerators, but they're approaching the market with more of an investment mentality because they're actually making investments in the companies. And those investment mentalities and implementing those practices are just kind of becoming commonplace. What I'd like to do is turn it over to Shay right now for a bit, because he's actually took his company, went through Techstars, actually has graduated through Techstars, and can provide a little more in-depth perspective into some of the work that they've done.
Thanks, Richard. Can you all hear me now? Yes. So as Richard was just pointing out, this shift in incubator strategy is coming about because of what we're thinking of as a shift towards a more investor type approach to management.
Hey Shay, can you speak a little bit louder maybe? Maybe closer to the mic?
I have the mic right in front of me. Is this better?
This is better, yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for that. As I was saying, the approach is coming about because of a new crop of incubator types who are taking a more investor type approach, where while the CICs might be working with earlier stage companies, these incubators have later stage companies that they invest in with the expectation that they will generate a return on their investment. So the need is to actually help those companies with growing beyond just the initial phases of running pilots and finding partners that can help them prove that their products work. That being said, it's also possible to start to provide this approach to CIC companies, because business development is, as Richard said, something that can apply even at those early stages. And the experience I had through Techstars, we had a software-based company that was building back-end energy efficiency and customer engagement platforms for utilities. And what Techstars did for us was introduce us to executives at those utilities so that we could get strategic conversations going. And I'll dive into this in a few more slides, but that was the personal example of me taking my business through an incubator. And while I worked for a small Cleantech incubator, one of the big learnings we had was our ability to connect the companies that we'd invested in. And an example was a company building a battery technology. We connected them with a university where some research had been going on that they could essentially license for their company to help them get to market quicker. And all these two examples I've given, we bucket under business development, where the incubator is helping the portfolio company with pursuing strategic opportunities. And we want to make a clear distinction between business development and sales. Sales is tactical. It's dialing for customers over the phone or web-based marketing methods that that's the next slide. Web-based marketing methods that allow you to capture as many leads as you can, while business development is more strategic. You are working with executives at the companies you want to partner with who will give you access to customers, but they're not your direct customers, they're more partners. The examples we give in the slide, the conversations could be around distribution channels, and I'll use Next on the next slide as an example. It could be expansion of markets, where business development is you, instead of selling solar systems to 20 homes, you partner with a building developer who is building an estate with 100 homes. And that is a partnership where those panels go on top of those buildings instead of you knocking on each door to sell panels to each customer. Business development doesn't carry quotas, and this is important because when incubators start to assist the portfolio companies with business development, you don't want to get caught in selling for them like the typical sales employee would do. You don't want to say, we will help you get 20 homes. What you're suggesting and offering to them is, we will partner you with the strategic leaders and executives at the partner that you would like business with. And we use the example of Nest here. Despite the fact it's a consumer product, Nest is really a clean tech energy efficiency product. So looking at it through that frame, what Nest started off doing was a retail approach where you as an individual could go out and buy a Nest thermostat from the website or from a store. Nest focused a little bit more on business development, and this is the distinction, by working with utilities where you can still buy on the Nest website, but the utility that Nest partnered with now becomes essentially the source for the customers to get a Nest thermostat. So in my home, I put a solar panel on and it comes with a Nest thermostat. Not because I bought from Nest, but because Nest had partnered with the utility to provide me a Nest thermostat. And that's the distinction there. And what does that business development process look like? This in itself could be a whole webinar. So while we won't dive into it, this process flow up here just shows that the first step in business development is the company itself defining and filtering who they would like to partner with. So who they would like to partner with or get licenses from, or who they would like to get a distribution deal with. Once the filtering is done, the next step is building relationships with the entities that can provide them the needs they have. And then the next step is closing. The building, I'll dive into that a little bit more because this is where the incubator can provide the most assistance, because it's all about building relationships here. The way Richard likes to frame it, it's the incubator opening up its Rolodex to the companies, the portfolio companies, saying, I know the executives at XYZ company. I can introduce you to them to help you get the business and the opportunity you're looking for at a higher level than just the sales. And again, there's a whole approach to building those relationships, building the right relationships with the technical buyer at the strategic partner or the executive leadership, the economic buyer. We won't go into that now because it's a whole separate webinar that we'll probably see if we'll give at some point. And what we'll do now is dive into the example of Sukasa. I'll let Richard take over here and I'll chime in as we go, pointing out the business development element.
Should we pause a bit maybe before Richard takes over and take a few questions if there are any? I see one that Jin put in here.
Sure.
Maybe we can take that question and then we can move forward. Does it work?
Yeah, we could
Definitely,
do that.
yes.
Yeah.
Right, so let's take two questions, one from Jin, one from Katie, and then we can move ahead and do the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, so...
I can repeat the question if you don't mind. So this is a question from Angelo. He asks, why is business development uniquely challenging for our founders? When is the right time in the life cycle to consider business development as opposed to sales or MVP? How can business development efforts be validated without quotas and metrics? So that's three questions together from Angelo.
Yes, thanks, Angelo.
So maybe you can answer that. We'll move on to Katie.
Yeah, I'll answer, and Richard can chime in with any additional input to add. So why is business development uniquely challenging for our founders? In the Cisco context, what I've seen is that most of the founders haven't progressed as far along in their careers to have built relationships at the executive levels of the companies they would like to partner with. So I'll use the South Africa example. We found some founders who are pretty young in their careers, and there's a bit more of a deferential approach to business in these countries that prevents you from just picking up the phone and trying to sign up a partnership with an executive at a large corporation. How this is sort of how you get around this is the head of the incubator, Tabi, for example, in South Africa. She has that reputation and has the relationships that allow her to have the conversation on behalf of the founder to get beyond that obstacle. And then while the founder is the one who will take on the conversation, the introduction and warming up the lead, as we call it, happens through the incubator head. So that's the first question. Right time in the life cycle to consider biz dev as opposed to sales or MVP. It actually depends on what sort of relationship you're trying to build. So the example I gave for the battery company, they needed the core technology for their business idea. And so it was even before they had the MVP, the business development relationship was developed to get them the license. So that was very early. And again, the founder couldn't have the relationship conversations with the head of Argonne National Laboratories, which is one of the large laboratories, research labs here in the US. But I'd done some work with the head of the laboratory and could introduce them to the head of the laboratory to get the conversations going. So that response is to suggest that it can be as early as possible, but it depends on what the actual requirement is. And it can also be once the product is live in market and you're trying to get larger distribution, in the case of Nest, or strategic partnerships that allow you to enter into markets you probably wouldn't be able to enter. Richard, will you take the metrics one, or do you just want me to carry on?
Yeah. As far as the metrics, I mean, I think the point, business development, you can use metrics and such. We're not saying that. Really what we're saying is the key thing is between business development and sales. Sales is more tactical, business development is more strategic. It's more not. It's just more to not overcomplicate things. Is what we're not talking about here is dialing for dollars. We're not talking about having incubators call up customers and it's a boiler room where you're trying to call as many people as possible and make sales. That's not what this is about. What it's about is from the business development perspective, and hence kind of the Nest example of how do you maybe reach out to strategic partners? How do you use the network and the ecosystem that the incubator has access to that an individual startup does not? And how do you open those doors, to create opportunities? So there'll be metrics and everything, right? I think what we were trying to do is more distinguish between sales and business development, so that the CICs or incubators can think of it more from the perspective of the introduction standpoint as opposed to the making calls type standpoint.
Great, thank you. Maybe we can take one more question from Katie. Katie asks, what country is Nest in, and how does country context make a difference in business development?
So, thanks for that, Katie. What I'll suggest is that, yes, Nest is a US example, but doesn't change the dynamic that you're trying to set in place. So I'll use an example from Nairobi, actually. This is a company, the seed fund I work with, invested in. They were providing essentially irrigation, small-scale irrigation technology to farmers. And what they were doing initially was selling to individual farmers, and these are small scale farmers. So a business development conversation in that context was to introduce them to the bank that was providing the loans to those small scale farmers, so that the bank became a strategic partner that offered the irrigation technology to those farmers at scale. So the bank was providing the loans to buy the technology anyway. So yes, Nest is the US, but this applies in Sub-Saharan Africa and most of the markets where the CICs do their work. It just depends on how the incubator decides to approach assisting the companies they work with. Does that make sense?
And let me
Thank you so
let
much,
me just add on that. I think right now Nest is in almost about 18 countries, 18 to 20 countries. Obviously a U.S. company, but primarily in developed countries, Europe, Scandinavia, Australia. That product obviously isn't as applicable for Sub-Saharan Africa. I think it's more the point of the example. But as Shay pointed out, there are other examples that are more relevant to certain countries. So to the second point of that question, country context makes a huge difference. And it's very important to understand the context within which you're operating, and what the best manner of strategic, attack may be, if it's in regards to business development.
Great, thank you. And Tamika says, good morning, everyone. So good morning to you too. So maybe we can move ahead and go through the rest of the presentation.
Sure. So in regards to SECASA, SECASA is the Climate Innovation Center of South Africa. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was the second CIC launched after Kenya. Morocco, Ethiopia may have been, I don't know the exact dates, but it's been around since 2013. It's a little different than the other CICs in that it doesn't receive full funding from World Bank because South Africa is above the poverty line now. However, most of its funding has come from the Gauteng provincial government. It's part of the Innovation Hub, which was founded in 2001, which is a provincial government initiative basically supporting development in that region. So a couple of challenges they had early on were it was more regional than a national focus, and they were a part of a larger organization where they were really only focusing on pre-incubation. They had a 9-month program early on to work with climate-related technologies. The majority of technologies going through the Innovation Hub were more IT-related. They also now have a life science or a bio-type incubator, a mobile and such. So they have a couple different verticals. We actually worked with them to kind of help shift their model, and now all of the verticals within the Innovation Hub are full-fledged incubators running companies all the way through, or running ventures all the way through for up to 3+ years now. With SECASA, a couple years ago, they looked at expanding from a provincial program to a more national program on the entire throughout entire South Africa, and they were actually able to secure about $1 million in funding from the DBSA Green Fund to help support those efforts. What that ended up doing was bringing in 15 new companies outside of the region that expanded their portfolio out to 70 companies. The challenge they had, though, is they didn't have personnel in those regions to help support those companies, and South Africa is relatively a large country geographically. So what they did is they started partnering with other partners like Saribi, Green Cape in the Western Cape, some others in Port Elizabeth and such, to help support those companies. Further, they realized of the companies, most of them were very, very early stage, that really needed access to funding just to get prototypes and pilots developed. As such, they identified the need for what they referred to as an investment readiness seminar or training to be critical for success for many of these new companies. They secured a partnership with Impact Amplifier, which was a group that then helped conduct a 3-day boot camp in IR. And as a result of that, they had 9 of their companies actually secure over $500,000 post-application with a startup support program. And of those 9, 5 companies are expected to have their first commercial sale this year, with one of them actually being selected to continue on with Impact Amplifier's Accelerator Boot Camp, or continued on with their boot camp, as well as established a partnership to help support the development of equity or the raise of equity for a production facility. So this is kind of an example of more of a partnership type of business development where SECASA helped put in place, pulled in a necessary partner that was able to help support their companies in not just fundraising, but actually beyond that in driving sales as well. Another example SECASA had more direct in some business development support was with one of their companies called EcoMatch. EcoMatch is a recycling company for construction and demolition waste. They take recycled products and such, and they've been incubated at SECASA for about 2 years now. The incubator helps support them again in securing funding, a little over $1 million in equipment loan, but also helping secure the first commercial pilot with one of the municipalities in Gauteng. And that's another example of where the relationships that the incubator has at partnership levels, in this case it was the municipality, which was needed for EcoMatch to really develop their first commercial pilot, to have a reference point that they could then go to others and show them where they're actually successfully operating. And it was those relationships that SECASA was actually able to open up. Again, go back to the slides that Shay was discussing. It's really about building those relationships. The closing of that, Secasa can support on, but usually it's the company's responsibility to close those deals. But how do you basically help make the introductions and help build the opportunities there? And an interesting thing with EcoMatch is now they're kind of being, as Secasa says, re-incubated because they've identified some value-added product where beyond just the simple recycling they're doing, they're now taking that recycling, they're converting it into a recycled brick product, which then can be sold at a higher value. So they're supporting them in certification of that product for South Africa, as well as in helping further support business development to find partners to help drive adoption of that product. So that's really interesting. And then we don't have a slide on it, but Shay, maybe you'd like to just take a minute to talk about what we've done or what Secasa's done and some of the roles we had with another one of the companies, Braefoil.
Yes. So thanks, Richard. Braefoil is, while we don't have the slide here, it's a company that provides a new type of wind turbine. That's the simplest explanation I can give for the technology. It's innovative, and it's the sort of company where the approach can't be sales. It has to be business development because they're working with larger entities that are building wind turbines at scale. And what Secasa managed to do for them was bring them to Africa Utility Week, get them a stand that, so certainly, Katie asks, what is the name of the company? It's called Braefoil, Brayfoil. And what ended up happening is that Secasa brought them to African Utility Week as an exhibitor, and they ended up having very strategic conversations with some of the utilities that were there from across the continent. And in one particular case with a company, an engineering firm that does design builds for some of the developers. And I believe right now they're currently working with one of those companies, the design firm, to help them with the engineering design and product development that would have cost Braefoil millions of dollars, frankly. And they're helping them to do that with the promise and the hope that once the product gets into market, this firm continues to partner with them in the design and development of the product, which is when they'll see the returns on having helped Braefoil early on. The point here is those conversations came about as a result of the high-level strategic relationships that Secasa could build for Braefoil.
Yeah, and building upon that point, as Shay mentioned, Secasa helped support Braefoil as well as several of their other companies to attend Africa Utility Week, which was in Cape Town in May. This is kind of more of a marketing effort, putting out a booth which their companies could then attend. So there was somewhat of a shotgun approach in that instance, but then there was also some more direct approach with pulling in partners. And Braefoil, it's a really interesting company in that, it kind of uses biomimicry, which is related to studying the design of bird wings and how can you actually improve airfoils. And while wind turbines are probably their key entry point, they're also looking at how they can work in other areas such as aviation, yachting, and such. And another interesting thing that came about from Secasa and Africa Utility Week is they were actually able to meet one of the skippers of the America's Cup winning yacht from South Africa. That introduction has actually led to them using, to that America's Cup skipper using Braefoil on their yacht to help test and such. So it's been kind of a very interesting story today. And I've attached the web link so you can go and look more about the technology if you'd like. So let me move on now to, I wanted to throw in a little case study from UTIC Squared from us, just to further elaborate the point. We at IC Squared, one of our roles is to help launch incubators and to do training and capacity building for incubators. Last year we launched Accelerate, which is a new accelerator / incubator in India in the state of Andhra Pradesh. We're working with FICCI as well as the Andhra Pradesh Innovation Society. We actually have one of our own guys over there being the executive director for the first few years, training the people, and then we'll be turning it over to kind of the local Indian team. But the interesting thing about Accelerate is they've got, while they have cohorts of companies, they've been operational for about a year now. We're on our third cohort, anywhere from about 20 plus companies per cohort. In addition to the training and mentoring support that's provided to help build out business models, a select few of the companies actually are also receiving business development support for both the domestic markets in India as well as international. And two companies, I threw some examples up there, TJ Tires and Oriental Aquamarine Biotech. I've actually done some support on both of those companies. And not to get into the detail of those companies, TJ Tires is kind of a new self-healing tire that helps improve fuel efficiency. And Oriental Aquamarine is a recirculating aquaculture systems for fish farms and shrimp farms that helps improve water quality, reduce water waste and all. Accelerate is not a climate incubator. It's a general incubator, and we see all types of techs from biotech to IT. These are two examples which cross into the climate realm. Oftentimes in India, we see a lot of climate-related stuff just because of the necessity for clean energy and water in that country. But specific to TJ Tires and Oriental Aquamarine, we've actually have business development support, both internal to Accelerate and external, that we've brought aboard to help support these companies. For example, I've been working with TJ Tires to help drive adoption of their technology in the ATV market here in the Americas. It's been a very slow go, a hard road, but we're trying to make those introductions at the top level. With Oriental Aquamarine, they've got a lot of applications throughout Southeast Asia. We have one of our old colleagues who's based in Thailand who's actually making connections in Thailand, Australia, and other parts kind of Southeast Asia to help make the introductions necessary for Oriental Aquamarine to expand their business. So again, it's just another example to show, we're not talking about dialing for dollars. We're not talking about making sales calls. What we're talking about is trying to open the door through either relationships we already have or relationships that we can get to that the companies can't get to, that can provide them greater opportunities for building their businesses. We've only got a few more slides yet left. I don't know if we maybe want to just continue through or pause right there to address any of the case studies we just discussed.
Let's just go through them because we don't have a lot of time left. So let's just go through the slides quickly, and then we can have 5 minutes at the end to go over the questions.
Okay. So in regards to the business development support, like I just mentioned with Accelerate, in addition to providing leads, it is possible to actually bring in experts as well to support the companies beyond just introductions. The challenge with that, with the CICs or other incubators, can be that can usually be at a cost or such. For example, we pay our business development experts a flat retainer a month to support the companies on a multi-company basis. And the point is, if you are looking to bring in external people to help support you with that as an incubator, the key things you want to look for is obviously somebody that has prior experience in business development or sales with high growth type companies, somebody who's done it before, somebody who's comfortable with that. I would say though, probably the key thing really is that second bullet is having existing relationships within the industry that the company is focused in. Because it's really about opening doors. And then oftentimes the desire to give back and willingness to support, the point of that is oftentimes you cannot pay these people what they can actually make on the open market. So oftentimes you'll find people that are maybe in retirement that are looking just to do some good and that's the great thing about the CICs is, the companies have a lot of good social benefits and such, so it can be easier to find people to give back in essence. But that can be one of the challenges, and I know we've seen that in South Africa, back to that example of the consultants and many of the CICs, the consultants that work with the CICs are actually paid, whereas in the Western, in the US especially, you often see mentors and advisors basically doing it on a pro bono basis, either because they're giving back or maybe they want to try and find their next deal. So that's one of the challenges that really is a challenge that is hard to overcome of if you do bring in external support, how can you do it cost effectively? Because in a lot of the regions we see the CICs, there's just not that same level of experience, whether it's mentors and advisors or whether it's business development support. So to summarize, the key things, the key points we want to make is, business development, it's an area where the incubators can kind of go above and beyond and continue to provide valued and impactful support. Whether that's actually driving deals that result in commercial success, or maybe it's driving opportunities early on that then lead to prototype development and lead to the viability of the technology itself. It's about the introductions. It's about developing that ecosystem, that Rolodex that incubators should have. For those of you that were in Kenya in February, you may remember Mark and I. Mark is our assistant director of the Clean Energy Incubator here. We talked about one of the key things that incubator managers can be is basically our connectors, connecting the companies to others in the community and providing those introductions that the companies themselves couldn't make. And then the final point is really, it shouldn't end when the companies graduate. The more successful the companies are, the better it looks for you as the CICs, and how do you put alumni programs in place, or how do you continue to support the alumni as needed beyond graduation with not just capacity building, but at that point, business development or other support. So at that, that's kind of our final slide. Be happy to take any questions that we have time for.
Thank you so much, Richard and Shay. Maybe we can ask Jen if she has anything to add to this.
No, I think the questions from the audience would be great.
Perfect. So, audience, if you have any questions, do type it in the chat box and we can read it out. We only have a few minutes, 3 minutes left. So maybe we can go over a little bit, do like 5 minutes of questions and answers, and then we can close it. And also the recording will be shared on the Open Learning Campus where you signed up for this presentation. So we're going to share that information, and also there will be a podcast as well with like a few minutes of this session, which you can hear with your iPhone or your Android phone, wherever you are, on your metro ride to work. So that's going to be there too. So any questions? Let's open it up. Don't feel shy.
We can see all your names, actually. So we may call on you next time, perhaps. Maybe I'll ask a question since I don't see one being submitted, Richard. In your, trying to come up with what would be a great strategic partner is not an easy thing for businesses, but also for incubator managers. Do you suggest sort of resources or books or blogs that you could read to learn more about how to become a successful business development makers?
Yeah, so
Richard, did you get the question?
Yeah.
I'll take it. What we could do is provide some additional links, but generally what makes the most sense is if you can look to similar companies in your industry and see what they're doing that are further along. So if, for example, the waste company in Sikasa, there are waste companies here in the US that are further along and sort of do similar things. If you look through their employee lists or on LinkedIn and find the folk playing that role for them within the company, I found it's a pretty good way of learning about the sort of skills you need and the sort of people you need to put in that role. And in some cases, you can actually just reach out to some of those people because, again, if you go back to the point of the incubator being a relationship builder for the company, that's a relationship you should build. Someone who's done it before, who knows business development and can both assist the incubator and train the portfolio company.
Great, thank you. Any other questions that we have?
I have a question. Should I just go?
Yeah, just come here and we can...
Sure. Hi everyone, this is Alexandra with SIBIN, the Climate Business Innovation Network here. I just saw a few of our new CACs have joined the webinar, thank you. So I was wondering, Richard and Shay, if you have any advice on kind of tips or the first steps to develop these ecosystems when you are actually starting not just CACs but other type of clean tech accelerators.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I can take that, and then Shay, you can build upon it. But I think one of the things that I've seen in working with the CICs is development of ecosystems is so key. When I started the Clean Energy Incubator here in Austin in 2001, clean energy was, I think it was like 14th on the importance of things in the city of Austin, and it was almost a job completely separate from supporting the companies, was going out and building the relationships and building the interest in that industry and trying to pull in the right partners. And the reality of it is if you don't have that ecosystem, then it's very, very hard for the companies to be successful in the end. So even though that wasn't a direct part of my job, it was very much so an indirect part of the job. So in regards to the CICs, I think it's key to get out of the office. It's key not to just look internally and working the processes, but it's also looking externally. And I think one thing that speaks to is in hiring the team, hire people who have, to the extent available, that have the experience in the industry and the knowledge. And I think for those, when you don't have that, some of the best ways to start developing those relationships is to start going to conferences, going to events, going to as many relevant type of activities that you can and meet those people, because it's about building trust and it's about building relationships with them, such that when you call them, they answer the phone, and when you say, hey, I have a company you want to look at, they're willing to look at it. And that takes time. But the way you can do it is you just have to get out there, and you have to meet the people, you have to attend the events, and you have to be there. So those that have those deep Rolodexes are great. Those that don't, you build them that way.
Great, thank you so much. Maybe we can take one last question from Amal. So the question is, what would you advise in a context where investors are too cautious?
Well, that's a tough one. Here's the challenges. Investors are all about risk and eliminating risk. Unless it's unless it's a social investor, an impact investor. But if they're investing for financial reasons, they're trying to eliminate risk. And the key thing is to match the profile. So if you've got investors that are too cautious, the challenge is if the nature of the business is that there's just a lot of risk, then maybe that's not the right investor. The challenge, though, is finding the right investors, and that's again that chasm, chasm, that valley of death, where you've got a lot of early stage, whether it's grant funds, foundations, maybe some early stage in angels or seed, and then you have the later stage investors. But it's really challenging. I think the one thing that you could recommend that we've seen is, from an incubator standpoint, make sure that your companies are prepared. Make sure that they know their numbers, that they've done their homework, that they don't just go in there and give what I call the Miss America answers that, we're going to save the world. Investors want to see detail. They want to see, like I said, they want to have their risk eliminated. So the more facts and the more figures that you can provide to help eliminate that risk, to make them less cautious, I think is the best chance. But really, you've got to make sure that you're talking to the right investors. If there's an investor that plays in the $5 to $10 million space and you're trying to raise $500,000, you shouldn't be wasting your time with them. If there's investors are also very much localized. So even here in the U.S., if you're in Texas trying to raise money and the VC's in California, you're probably going to have to move your company to California unless they have an office in Texas. So you need to make sure you're approaching the right type of investors. And when you approach them, make sure that you have, all your ducks in a row and your T's crossed and your I's dotted. And Shay,
Yeah, you've covered it pretty well. It's about understanding, and again, it really is building relationships with those investors, because the more you can convince them that the company is a fit for what they are looking for, the more willing they are to invest eventually.
And I know we're out of time, but let me just say, I think that goes back to the ecosystem point of where if the CICs can build up those relationships with the investors in their ecosystem, and build that trusted relationship, when they bring them a company, the investor will know that it's already been vetted and will have more comfort in looking at that deal. So investors are really key to the ecosystem and having those relationships.
Thank you so much, Richard and Shay. This was a great presentation, and thanks for taking all the questions. So really, really helpful. Just a little bit of a logistic thing. So all the audience, if you can fill in this survey about how the webinar was, how it went. So we're going to send that out after the webinar ends. And thank you for being a wonderful audience. And Richard and Shay, we definitely deserve a round of applause. So thank you for your time. And so this is going to be the end of the presentation, and we're going to share the recording on the OLC site where you signed up, and also there's going to be a podcast version as well.
And then the webinar will be back in about a month, and Alexandra will be sending invitations. So share your appreciation and enthusiasm with others so that we can have more participants in the future. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, we could add.
Is it still recording, or we are on? Good?
We're all good, yeah. We can already take a.
Oh, wow. And we can send a survey.